Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of... Oh, my God. We're going to do this every fucking week, Teddy. What is it? What do we do? What can't we do?
We Can't Stop Snapping, episode 72. The massive OTA just dropped, the most heavy-handed OTA balance patch that we have ever seen, smacking down exactly what the community wanted in the meta highlight in Bounce, and then elevating, I think, some cards completely out of the blue with some wild potential spread. I am so excited, and I haven't seen anything besides positive reactions to this, honestly.
Yeah, that's a great point. We always we kind of take the community interaction or reaction to things with a grain of salt. People are tend to lean more to the negative stuff for a lot of things. I mean, even Glenn mentioned this in a recent what's it called? Ask the Team
Twitter
thing,
post
where they're like, how do you value like the recent like backlash or whatever? And he said the same way that we respond to everything with the internet. It's more prevalent to have negative reactions be heard on the internet in many different spaces as opposed to positive ones. It's like the old restaurant review adage. If you're a restaurant owner, you have to remember that one good review or one good experience, you can have that 10 times in a row, and then maybe you get one word of mouth from those 10 good experiences, right? But whereas one bad experience will get you 10 word of mouth. You know, like for people not to go there.
100%. Because if the experience meets expectations, you don't hear anything about it. And people's expectations are that they're going to enjoy the game. And so when they don't enjoy the game, they're going to let you know. And then when they do something like this that feels like really incredibly awesome, you let them know too. So, I mean, hats off to the developers for taking these swings. I think a lot of these cards really deserved it. And the cards that are getting the buffs, I think they deserve the buffs as well. They're very cool designs that open up some very interesting theory crafting opportunities.
Yeah, so the way we're going to do it today is we're going to go over this OTA, and we're not going to basically just pound over every single card to be like, what did they do? What does this mean? We're going to do that. There are some highlights, of course, because this is such a huge OTA, but we're basically going to take a look first at what this means for the immediate change of the meta, being, of course, the changes to Bounce, and then the change to Magic. And then over on your side, Teddy, we're going to focus a lot more on what is the fun stuff that we can do, and also not just the meta impact of Magic, but what are the fun things that she opens up now? Look at Phoenix Force getting a change, Ghost Spider as well, and of course the Living Tribunal, which...
The Triumphant Tribunal now! He's a god. It was just, you'll have to wait for my half of the episode to find out exactly while we're teching that.
Yep, so let's get into it. But first, I would like to finish our conversation we were having right before we started. We were talking about music off recording or whatever. We were talking about working out and stuff like that. Yeah. So actually, I guess this is a good question for you guys. Let us know down in the comments below. I'll make a poll thing, whatever, for Spotify in this episode. What music gets you pumped up in the gym? What gets you motivated to do
with the
things?
connection to Spotify, we should make a public Snap playlist.
Honestly,
the Can't Stop Snapping playlist. We'll piece it together. Some highlights. I think that's well within our reach.
Well, so I know we were talking about this, and I was saying Slaughter to Prevail, which you went and got yourself a little sneak peek of them, and you said that's a little too much for your taste.
The sneak peek, if anybody is wondering, is like 100 thunderstorms happening at once, with the full lightning going on in the background. Like I could rock out to one song, but not an entire album.
Никаких разбитых судеб. С рождения в глазах горит огонь. Приходит смерть, она тебя разбудит. Demolition!
I think if you listen to their album from 2019, which is phenomenal, I'll have to say, and this for anybody, just sit down and go from start to finish and think of it
close to long.
Don't allow yourself to get lost in like what feels like chaos. Allow yourself to pick out a certain thing from all the songs and focus on that, and allow everything else to seemingly flow back into harmony with that element, whether it's the vocals, the drums, the guitar, the bass. Like, just fixate on something, and I guarantee you'll come out of it with a different perspective than you might have heard just casually listening to it. Because I can understand, for someone that doesn't listen to that kind of thing normally, it does sound chaotic, and it is a bunch of thunderstorms and stuff like that going on. But if you're able to pinpoint something and focus on that and allow it to take form, you can find a newfound appreciation. I really think so.
I would 100% do that when I was listening to the groups that I really liked and albums on repeat for, like, back in the day, Disciple, and then farther on, Nightwish, and some other stuff like that. Like, finding that one line that just goes through, and, like, I know the bass line, and then I'd listen to just vocals on one time, and then you just have it on lock in your brain forever after. My wife is still, like, freaked out every time I'll start singing along to a song after hearing it twice. She's like, I can't do that. I'm like, I get it. It just works.
So what would be your go-to, either album or song, band, whatever, when you're trying to work out and just kind of get motivated?
When I'm trying to work out and pump up, it would be like 10,000 Fists, Disturbed, I think.
10,000 fists in the air.
I mean, Draymond's voice, his vocals are just on another level, as so beautifully showcased with the recent Sound of Silence cover that they did.
Which is not so recent now. I mean, that's
true. I'm dating myself.
That's a few years ago now. I'm gonna be honest. I tried really hard because I grew up really loving Disturbed. That was like my middle school and early high school kind of thing. That was my jam. I remember I basically listened to them casually through middle school, and once I got to my sophomore year of high school, there was one of my buddies that was his favorite band, and I was like, give me all your albums, I'm going to burn them. And then, like, not physically burn them and set them on fire, for those of you who aren't familiar.
I remember the terminology.
Like, you actually would, it's called burning the CD, and you burn it into the drive, or like burn it onto another copy of a CD, like, so I could also listen to them too without stealing his CDs. We didn't have, like, Spotify wasn't that big yet. It was actually
the internet wasn't that big yet.
Even then, like Spotify and stuff like that, it wasn't even really in its own form, if it even existed at that point. It was mostly like Last FM, Pandora Radio, like those online radio stations where it was more so you get a random ass playlist based on the song that you liked, and you better hope it comes up. Otherwise, fuck you. You can't choose your songs, and then you had to pay like $30 a month to get that type of thing with like Pandora shit like that. That was awful. But I got all the albums and just went all in on Disturbed. And so would you say 10,000 Fists is your favorite album by them?
Oh, let's see. Let's look at the discography. It might be, because I've
always liked, it's got 10,000 Fists. It's got, is Stricken on that one, or is that Indestructible? Stricken's on 10,000 Fists, isn't it?
I mean, The Sickness is so good as well.
I really liked Believe was always my go-to. That was my favorite Disturbed album.
No, my top one will be Indestructible. That was the one that I listened to the most, actually. That one even before I like got into it in like high school. That was like the one album I actually sat down and listened to, because Inside the Fire was on the radio, The Night was on the radio. What was the other one? There's one more single. I mean, obviously Indestructible itself was on the radio too. Yeah, that's like their high. I feel like that album maybe had less high highs for the group, but as an album, I don't know, it grabbed me.
That's those types of bands, I guess, that lean a little bit towards like what you can call dad rock, because they have that kind of setup and formula, the formula in terms of like how they're structured. But I mean, that a lot of the stuff I really liked, and a lot of stuff I can still listen to and appreciate. Like a big like Breaking Benjamin fan. Like I love them growing up. Then that like kind of opens up the doors to like other stuff. I still like Rise Against and all that shit. So like that's like I'm not all in on just super heavy stuff. Which, by the way, if you're gonna listen to super heavy stuff, I recommend Veil of Maya. Veil of Maya is so fucking good. You would probably like them more so than the Slaughter to Prevail stuff, because they have a nice balance between their screaming and their singing and all that.
Interesting. Yeah, because here's the thing: is like I went from there and then I pushed back and I went to more symphonic metal, like Nightwish, even some like techno metal like Amaranth and some other stuff like that.
Ooh, yeah, I haven't listened to fucking Amaranth in a while. You would definitely like Veil Mind because they have a little bit of that like techno, not. I mean,
like electronic metal hybrid.
It's yeah, but it's more so like in the back end. Like it's
Gotcha.
like they sprinkle it in as that flavor as opposed to it just being like that one album from Asking Alexandria that everyone hated when they went like all techno basically or whatever. Like that's the one I can think of. But, you know, anyway, if you guys have favorite albums for working out or whatever, let us know. But I wanted to finish that conversation because I love music, and that's one of my favorite things in the world. So
yeah, and it is, I guess, to tie it into Bounce, as you hear all this drama from the bands as they break up with different members and whatnot, and then try and reform to be just as good as before, or maybe not as good as before. Bounce is looking at potentially needing to make a lot of substitutions here. If you were to say that the lead singer of Bounce was Kitty Pryde, she doesn't have the chops that she used to. Being changed from 1-0 to 1-2. I think the community nailed this prediction. +1 on return. It means that her highs are not there. Her consistency is, though. I think she still hangs in with the band. And I think what the unfortunate casualty was the Shuri Kitty Pryde deck. It had to die because the other forms were too strong. And it's too bad because that Shuri Kitty Pryde deck I don't think was overpowered, and it was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that can work in some way still, but it's certainly not as good nor as consistent of like the massive amount of like power output you get. Jesus Christ, Arby. I know. She woke herself up from a sleep because she gets that random cat instinct to lick herself violently. And by doing so and jerking upward, she basically was sliding off my lap out to fall. I had to catch her and then got mad at me for catching her. I'm like, all right, I'll fucking drop you next time. Anyway, Arby's my cat, by the way, for those of you who don't know. So, yeah, I think she's going to be fine. I think she's still going to be very good in Bounce. It's just going to take away some of those weird different builds you can go with Kitty. And probably going to take away that chance of her being that blanket one drop that you just jam in as many decks as you can.
That's what I was going to say is now she has to have support for her to make sense in a deck. Otherwise, you run Nebula, I think, in her place every time. Like, if you were running her just to have something to do with one energy, you need something else to justify the Kitty Pryde now.
Yep. And then another card that got hit in Bounce, which is funny that they refer to it as being a Bounce nerf, and they even joke about that in the thing as well, is Spider-Ham. I'm going to gloss over Hitmonkey
Premier
for now,
one cost. Yeah.
But yeah, Spider-Ham being a 1-1 before and now being a 2-2 doing the same thing. And you know what I'm more interested about? I'm more interested in the idea that they're saying that they'll have a future adjustment down the road to address his behavior with big cards like Death, She-Hulk, and Apocalypse, essentially saying those decks are now out of the meta. And then, all right, so, okay, she was yelling at me. So I'm very interested in what that is going to look like. What do you think that's going to look like? Now, of course, in Bounce, whatever, this is a card that saw the most play in this deck, but it's seen play in pretty much as many other decks as you can think of that don't really rely on super heavily those one drops. Like they might be playing Nebula and like Sunspot at the same time because of the flexibility that he provided, and just being like, you don't need to hit on turn one. Like Iceman, you want to hit on turn one or turn two. You can wait until like 3 or 4 for Spider-Ham. But what do you think they're going to be doing that makes that change so that he's not as punishing against cards like She-Hulk, Apocalypse, and Death?
I think that they just make it so that he hits a random card instead of the most expensive card. I feel like that's somewhat a lateral because you can occasionally have even more pivotal cards for your build in the middle of your energy curve, but then because it's specifically pushing out these other archetypes from their existence, which it is really unfortunate. Like he specifically squelched Discard, which was a viable meta deck and more free-to-play accessible. So I'd love to see that being able to open up more space. They're also just looking at his general play rate to see if they need to make an additional adjustment. It was funny to me to hear that they called out She-Hulk. Who is trying to play She-Hulk and then is sad about Spider-Ham? I don't understand that one. Like I felt like She-Hulk has been gone from the meta for a little while. Also, I think in terms of just Spider-Ham, like the community correctly identified that he was a 2-cost masquerading as a 1-cost for a while, and so that's why he was absolutely everywhere. It is going to make him a lot harder to run and bounce now at the 2-2. I think that he's still viable for the 2-2 style. Like if he was to release fresh without people having their mind now, he got nerfed. He's worse. But what if you just heard fresh? There's a 2-2 that takes away the ability of the opponent's strongest card and shows you what's in their hand. I think you still play it.
Yeah, and it makes for his flexibility in other decks a bit more difficult now. You can't just blanket shove him into a lot of decks because that's what 1-drops do. They create flexibility. For anyone who watched last week with Drew Barry on, we over on your side of the channel, on that half of the episode, we talked about like a big old bracket and like breaking down the best of the best, or I guess the worst of the worst, if you want to go about it that way, of Snap's history and these cards that were undeniably broken. And the winner was Nova. Right, but it was but up against Nova was the old Okoye that we decided on, being the 1/1 version that gave +1 to everything. It's just 1-drops are supremely powerful in their flexibility, and not just something like a Sunspot or a Nebula. It can just be something like a Spider-Ham. And I wonder if
it's an order of magnitude different, right, to go from 1 to 2, because a 1 cost, you can think, I can run any 1 cost in any deck if I think it's genuinely good, and it won't change my game plan. The 2 cost becomes a lot harder to squeeze in, and then 3 cost is like, that has to build into the main plan of my deck. I only have 6 turns.
Exactly, and I'm wondering how big of an impact this makes on other 2-drops as like competition. Like, I already don't see Scorpion hardly ever. Does this just make Scorpion stock go down even worse? And then, of course, this allows, or this makes it so Spider-Ham, you don't really want to play him in, Zabu shells with, like, Darkhawk specifically, like those packages, because typically the 2-drops that I see in that are going to be Zabu himself and then maybe Jeff for the flexibility. And I think you don't want the 3 2-drops in that deck. I don't know. I'm very skeptical about Spider-Ham in there. He could still be good, but I'm trying to imagine the curve, and I can see issues with, like, I mean, even Jeff has issues, but Jeff you can at least play on turn 6 as just a 2/3 if need be, right? Whereas Spider-Ham, not really a good turn 6 play.
No, not what you want to do on turn 6, but it could be exactly what you want to do on turn 5 when you had a 3-cost Rock Slide, and then you go into Spider-Ham. The opponent thought they had things figured out. You snapped on them, and then they lose their pivotal card.
Yeah,
or you don't snap on them. You just get a feel for what that final turn is. As long as he's coming out by turn 5, I think you're still fine. Yeah, so Jeff versus Ham, where does the recommendation go?
I think Jeff. I think the like, again, Ham is going to be still very powerful, especially considering they're like, we're going to change something else with him soon. So maybe you should play Ham for now until they nerf him again, ultimately. But I still think I would take Jeff over it because that flexibility means so much. Being able to get into a Professor X lane or be able to sneak into like a Sanctum Sanctorum and things like that. It's
Professor X is certainly he's on the rise right now, and
absolutely.
Jeff plays perfectly with that. So, to throw a wrench in here, Spider-Ham is half price compared to Jeff. So if you didn't have either one and you were trying to scrape together tokens through Token Tuesday bundles, which one are you getting? I feel like I might actually go Ham first, just because he's so much cheaper.
I think I'd still go Jeff. I can tell you why. Because we're not getting Jeff in a reserve or a spotlight reserve until the last month of what they've announced, which is the first week of September.
It's a ways.
It is a while from now. And I would argue that within that time, through the Token Tuesdays that come out, in addition to random bundles or whatever, or maybe you get enough variants to hit your 2K or whatever, right? Like even this one that came out today was 1,000 tokens for that, $20, 1,000 tokens, the variant and stuff. You're going to recoup 3,000 tokens a lot faster than you'll get 6,000 before Jeff would even come out anyway. So before Jeff comes out, if you have enough to get Jeff now, you can get Jeff and Spider-Ham before he's even in a spotlight cache, I feel.
Interesting. So both of them to make a great mirroring is they release on Battle Pass card release weeks. So there's no other new card releasing with them in the caches. You have Spider-Ham, Nimrod, and Galactus coming out together in one cache, and then the next season you have Jeff, Ghost Spider, and Null. Null with the repeat already.
Yeah, I'm
Those
not
are
a fan
both
of that.
so good. Yeah, the Null early repeat, I don't get it. Is that because we're actually getting a token shop drop of everything that got skipped? Or is it because they just want to refeature Null and they've got great Null art coming out their eyes? Null variants don't miss. Honestly, both of these caches look pretty good. If you don't have the other cards featured, of course, like if you're not someone who gets the Battle Pass, these caches that release right now are actually very good. You get the Ghost Spider, you get the Nimrod. Ghost Spider looking way better after this OTA, and Nimrod looking really good coming into the next season where we get X23. I think the community is very much unifying around X23 being a new top meta contending card, and so you're going to want the Nimrod for that. The Galactus, I don't know.
So too.
He's a fun bag of tricks, but he's not what he used to be. And then Spider-Ham, now at 2-2, maybe a little bit harder to swing. Like if you don't care about the Galactus and you don't care as much about the Spider-Ham, then just to go for Nimrod, that's a tall ask.
There's a lot of weird bundles for these like things. Like it's hard to say.
I don't want to criticize them too much. I feel like we've heard a lot of this, but yeah, for people who are fairly well developed in their collection, they're like, these caches are such a ripoff when you get a couple opens that are not something either you already have or you didn't care about.
Well, not to let's not harp on this too long then, but quick solution I still think is very easy. Doesn't take much, because I think the system in place is a huge step forward, but they've shot themselves a foot in a little bit for overcompensating the tokens that you get each month, and then of course, which they've already addressed in an answer to the community, that they're displeased currently, as well as everyone else, with the random Series 4, Series 5 card aspect of the Spotlight. So very simple. Add duplicate protection to the Series 4, Series 5, meaning you cannot pull anything you don't own. And if you, for some reason, own every other Series 4, Series 5 card, then you just go ahead and get a variant, right? That's fine. I think that's, or even better yet, maybe instead it's 1,000 tokens. Like something like that.
Yes.
But I can see them being
rebate
stingy.
Would be awesome.
I can see them being stingy on the tokens, especially if they, in the same vein, do my second suggestion of upping the monthly tokens to, I think it should be 2,000. I've seen some people say that based on the new system and the math involved, you can essentially be free to play and then eventually have a complete collection based on the Spotlight caches if they do that. But you'd have to optimize the system. And my argument to that is, not every person optimizes the system. Most people don't think about the game that way. And I don't think you should punish or make a thing worse just for those few people that will optimize it. But let's say if that's the case, then 1,000 or 1,500 a month. It needs to be over. It cannot be 400. It has to be minimum 1,000, in my opinion. Which I think that's still even low.
Slow. It hurts. So what about? I like this. I like getting to use the token shop a little bit more because I thought it was a good system, and just unfortunately never got full support for the community to really enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
What if the dupe protection comes in and then they just space out? You have two caches. One is for the variants and then one is for the cards, and they space out the cards much farther apart. But then you, on the same cadence, get a variant only cache. Because I feel like these new premium variants are super cool, but right now the sentiment is you open until you get a new card and then you stop. You don't, chasing a variant with your Spotlight caches is considered like malpractice with how slow you are to gather them and how many pulls you potentially need to get the specific cards you want later on. So if you have dupe protection and a guarantee of cards, albeit at a farther paced out space, and then they gave you a system to be able to interact to chase the variant systems that you want, I just feel like overall that would be more fun.
Yeah, I think that could work. Like as stands right now, I think most people will average about 1, maybe 2 Spotlight caches in a given week. I know I'm going to be averaging probably 2 every week, just based on like the challenges and like maybe getting a bundle that week that gives me an extra 1,000 credits or whatever, but that's really it. Like, without going super whale and spending on gold to like get more credits, I'm not going to do that for a lot of these spotlight caches. Like, even now, like I would like to get Echo. I don't really want to spend 6K on her, so I'm going to attempt to get her from the spotlight cache. But if I don't, then I'll probably just buy her. I'm not too worried about that. But yeah, I do like your idea of like separating them into two different tiers to have a variant cache and a card cache.
Would you ever right now throw an extra cache at chasing a variant? Only for a variant. That's like the only thing that you want.
Not really. No.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm looking at, is like the disparity between like the value of getting a new card is so high that these awesome variants are just getting thrown into the caches to die. I don't think I'm ever going to see these pseudo exclusive variants played.
I mean, this exactly happened to me last week. Monday night, right before, literally an hour or two before the Switch, before Echo came out and the new Spotlight Cache released. I did 2 polls on the Spotlight Cache, and the only thing I was missing was the random one and then the null variant. Yeah. And I was literally 5 collection level away from my 3rd Spotlight Cache, right, of that week. Yep. And I was basically going like, I have enough credits to instantly get it and take the roll on the null variant that I really liked. Or I can wait 2 hours, do that, and try to get the Echo on first try. And I chose the latter. Even though the null variant I love, I'm sad that I didn't get it. But honestly, I am okay with it. And also, you know what? I think that's a little bit of a good thing that I didn't get it to an extent, because I kind of like the idea if I see someone with it, it's like, cool, you got the cool variant. Like, I got the Living Tribunal one and I have the Jean Grey one. I think those are really cool. I've yet to see someone, and I've seen a lot more Living Tribunal recently, by the way, today. I've yet to see that variant. Yeah, I've yet to see that variant. And I'm like, cool, it feels nice that I have something that people don't have. And I think that's a nice little aspect of like when I see the Jean Grey, when I see the null, and like all these other variants. I don't want everyone to have them, but you should have the option to push for that in a more feasible way than not. So I don't know. It's a touchy thing.
Fair enough. Like, if they're okay making ultra exclusive variants that you're hardly ever going to see, then I guess more power to them, because it does become that much more special. And with their emphasis on kind of the quote-unquote unique collection, I feel like because the card catalog in Snap is nowhere near like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! People can be collection complete relatively easy, but the unique collection is your variants and how you've chosen to upgrade them. Are you gold on it? Are you foil on what? Are you noir on what? And how do you like to tech out that way? Which I can definitely respect. I can respect that. Not to fast forward too far into our segment, but or my segment. Living Tribunal, the people who didn't pull him and were initially very happy, I think might be a bit jealous from the people who pulled Tribunal while chasing Jean Grey, because that buff is insane.
I quick tangent, because we have to get back to the last thing for Bounce in a second to go over that. But I find it really weird when people get upset about pulling things. Like, for example, I pulled Living Tribunal from a Series 5 like cache, not a Spotlight cache. Yeah. This is before the system got put in. Just a random cache. I got Living Tribunal, and I was like,
1 in 400.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, I mean, I'm not going to be mad that I got it. I was not going to spend tokens on it, so I'm glad that I got the card I wasn't going to spend tokens on that I find interesting enough to want to play. It's just I don't find valuable enough to do anything with it in terms of the monetary aspect. So I don't understand people getting upset. Like, I know you didn't get the one you wanted, I guess, and that, I guess, creates a whole other topic of the feel-bad aspect of the loot boxy type of gambling idea when it comes to these types of caches. But I guess that can be for another episode entirely. We could spend all day on that. The other
there we
thing,
go. That's the headline. Is Snap ethical?
Yeah, exactly. The other thing for Bounce that got changed was Hitmonkey himself from a 2-0 gain +2 power for each other card you play this turn to a 3-2. So they're tacking on 1 additional energy and also giving you essential 1 hit off of his original ability to compensate for that change. We were talking about something a little bit earlier before we started recording. And with another card in this list, and looking at some of the ways that you can do stuff with bounce, how do you feel about Surfer Bounce? I want you to tell me all about it, Teddy. How are you feeling about that? Because you brought that up to me earlier.
So the 3-2 stat line seems to be the dev's new favorite as opposed to 4-6. 4-6 is old news, guys. It's 3-2s now. We got Surfer, we got Monkey, and we have Magic. Down from 5-3 to 3-2. She is Queen of Limbo, and she could be Queen of the meta right now. I think that Bounce is the surprise. Old Bounce would gas itself out by T6. New Bounce is like, yeah, give me more turns. I'll keep on racing you now that I've set up all my engine pieces. Mm-hmm. And with how many of the cards that are good in Bounce have been pushed into 3 cost, Surfer Bounce is legitimately looking like a powerful tech piece. I don't think that you're playing Surfer to then beast him back and play him again. I think that you're trying to blow out the opponent with a final set of buffs on your Nakia, your Bishop, your Magic, your Monkey, and you could be running Jean Grey in there. I don't know. You do you. You have plenty of other auxiliary cards that could slot in as well, but with the shell of just like Kitty, Bishop, Angela as the bounce side, and then all these 3s, you're looking fantastic. Or even just skew it more toward Sarah deck that runs Wong anyway to be able to empower your Surfer. And then Monkey, Surfer on Wong plus 1 other 3 cost is looking mighty fine.
Yeah, honestly, that doesn't sound too bad either. Like a Brood on 1 lane. Maybe you just go Jean Grey, Brood, and then Wong, Surfer, Monkey. That's a 3, 4, 5, 6 right there that works.
Exactly. And if you've teched in Magic, you can extend the game even farther.
To help you find your combo pieces like Wong and things like that to go that extra mile.
100%.
Yeah, I don't mind that. I really don't.
Iron Man loves still running in this deck if you're setting up the Sarah and you have a turn 7 because you can play Iron Man plus a 3 cost on turn 6 and then go into your explosion of power, still probably playing from behind an initiative as Bounce is loath to do. I think the big echoes that I see here is like the 2 cards that are not on this list but are severely affected are Bast and Surfer. Surfer is rejoicing. Bast is looking at some of her best targets, not needing her anymore. I think Bounce actually cuts, I think they cut Ham, and I think they cut Bast as well, and maybe Hitmonkey's on the chopping block. Like for the true lean Bounce decks, I could see them dropping Monkey and then just going back to Bounce Hawk or Bounce Move Hybrid. To bring in one more card into the discussion, the Ghost Spider down from 2-3 to 1-2 synergy with Falcon now is looking beautiful for being able to combo around your Human Torch, and then even your Dagger, I think is cheap enough to be able to run happily here.
I think Bast is still viable because I think if you're going to be running any version of Bounce with Iron Man in there, it's hard to convince yourself and everyone else that Bast is incorrect. Even with Hitmonkey being like you're saying in those leaner versions, the one that goes to like Darkhawk again or whatever, with like Korg that you can pick up.
That deck will still love it.
That will still have Bast, and I think even the one that might want to run Hitmonkey could also still have Bast. Now, just again because like. You still have good hits with Angela and Bishop. I think Kitty is still a decent hit. I mean, it's still a +1 power. Mysterio is obviously still an amazing hit in that regard.
Yes, that's the god hit.
You lose some steam, of course. And some of your hits that were your most impactful are now just somewhat impactful. Though, what I am curious on is actually, what about a Sarah bounce list now with the cost increase on Hitmonkey and things like that? Could you go into that kind of route? Or even, I still think the best Sarah control list was the one that was doing the hybrid bouncing with like Kitty, and then you had like your Sentinel in there for consistency, and your like little Mysterio and stuff like that. I still think that was the best way to do it. Is that now maybe the default way to do bounce moving forward?
To include Sarah, that's interesting. I would love to hear your thoughts on what would have happened if the meta had continued to stew for another week or two here, because it felt like a very interesting progression of like everybody was like High Evolutionary is God, and then they're like, no, it's Bounce, and then they're like, okay, well, nerf Evolutionary, and then everyone's like, Bounce is God, I hate Bounce. But now, in this like final week leading up to this OTA, I didn't feel like Bounce quite had its solid foundation as people thought it did. People were teching in more initiative shots. The Professor X was coming out. And so and then we had this, I'm rambling it here at this point, but the Bounce went through this evolution of like, it was the Lambda Series tournament winning Bounce deck or nothing. And then it started playing in Sarah. And then the Sarah deck started cutting Sarah. They were running like Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you go for Sarah, if you just go for other control.
So I think Sarah makes a little sense now, but I want to touch on this real quick. So you're talking about maybe Bounce was starting to be on a little bit of a downswing, right? Because of the text people were making. I would argue, and I did argue this in my recent article with Snap.fan, talking about the rise of the Silver Surfer, not the movie, the actual meta and the deck itself in the
great movie. Saw it
of course, yep, 10 of 10, amazing. I mentioned this talking about the rules of three, which is the thing that I look at for decks. And we talked about it a little bit on this cast before, looking at things like, for example, Shuri. Shuri has 3 ways to combat the negative aspect of these high-powered cards. Red Skull giving +2 to all your opponent's card. Typhoid Mary giving -1 to all of your cards. They give you great large power output, but give a downside. The best way to combat that is A, Shuri, straight up doubling the power, pretty much negates the positives that you were giving your opponents. B, Sauron, silence it. And C, 0, silence it. Rule of 3, you have 3 ways to extend into your game plan. And I was talking about Bounce being an amazing aspect of this rule because they don't have a rule of 3. They have a rule of like 7. Every card in their deck is so amazing at both performing what it wants to do for the deck in terms of the engine and the way the deck runs with each other and the synergies, while also being a powerhouse in their own rights and pulling their own weight in terms of the power level that they present in a vacuum. that was the issue with Bounce. So, and one thing I mentioned in that is the text that you are talking about. That's one thing to help with initiative, right? For example, the biggest one being the Invisible Woman tech, hiding a Killmonger underneath her, or a Shadow King. While very smart to do so, I think ultimately extremely negative for the game. A horrible thing for the game. I think when you devolve yourself into a meta in which it is the correct thing to start by saying, well, you got to put this card in your deck because this deck's running rampant. You need this tech card to, combat it, right? Or this tech package. Otherwise, you don't have much of a chance. Which I think isn't that large of an exaggeration when you say that about Bounce of its recent state against most decks. It's just its flexibility was unmatched. It's why we basically decided on giving it the edge over High Evolutionary before its nerf, because of the flexibility and the way it can manipulate its lanes and, of course, its priority. I think when you have a meta in that state, even though technically it's still diverse, it's still healthy to an extent. What it means for the meta long term is very unhealthy, what I think, because it restricts your deck building, restricts the creativity of the community. While I will still admit it is creative that they came up with that counter, what it leads to leads to like no creativity flourishing whatsoever. I think that's always a bad thing. You shouldn't start any conversation of a new deck being it's a 10-card deck. You have to have these 2 cards in there right off the bat, which is like what we talked about with like Okoye and like Nakia and stuff like that. That's bad for the game too, because they're that good that they just slot into every deck. It's the same idea and the same principle, in my opinion. And I think this change, while maybe the meta could have caught up with it, it made it so that you really need to nip this in the bud so it's not gonna, create this monogamy or monotony, I should say, of the meta in terms of what you do for techs.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that Bounce was oppressive and that the nerfs are deserved. My view on like the tech of Invisible Woman or Ghost for control purposes to be able to like lock initiative is just a factor of the community gaining more experience and a higher skill level. I think Bounce was a very high skill expression deck, and especially the Theory Crafters who pioneered it, looking at how you can dance around initiative and just how valuable that was. I don't think the community understood that before Bounce, and now people both understand that and how to be able to play against it. So I think we've kind of leveled up as a community now that we've had the Bounce meta come and maybe go. Maybe it's still here. In terms of like the specific tech, it's also good up against Thanos, who seems to be one of the heirs apparent to the meta, winning another recent pretty high-profile tournament. So there could be more to this tech as like just generally good than just one deck.
Mm-hmm.
What do you got?
I was saying, then I started seeing, for the brief moment in time, while we were leading into this OTA, Bounce was playing Cosmo in some lists that I saw, and even against me, where I would do the Invisible Woman thing, and they just slammed the Cosmo in that lane, and I was like, God, oh fuck, this sucks.
It's the Baron Harkonnen. There's plans within plans, feints within feints.
Yeah, but like that's what I'm saying. Like, imagine then you were asking what would have happened if the meta kept going. I think a very possible growth or evolution of Balance is that they start playing Cosmo to just be like, all right, you're gonna tech in against us, we're gonna tech right back in against you. And again, This is where I say a sideboard would fix all of this, because rather than just saying you have to start your games with these techs in, you can just tech them in later in the next games and force your opponent to be like, well, I guess now you got to tech in that Cosmo you have in your sideboard now, huh? And like it creates this whole different game within a game. And I think that would be valuable. And that's where I think that would be healthy for the game, to have these really cool, intricate, builds of like, you got to bring in this package of Invisible Woman and like Killmonger. That's amazing for the game. But because of the context provided of a singleton aspect of the game, even in the sense of Conquest, because you can't change deck lists or decks even, that I think is a bad thing for the game. It's a subtle difference, really, but it makes the biggest difference in terms of like the health, I feel, of a format.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how different things would be. I think for ranked, it makes sense the way that it's set up right now, because it makes it as approachable as possible. If you start asking people to deck build a sideboard and whatnot, then they have to have a larger collection to build like the fully fleshed out meta decks and whatnot. So to be able to get people started playing ranked just as quickly and easily as possible, the current format makes sense. But yeah, when Conquest is so competitive, and then one bad matchup at the end of your gauntlet is just like, oh well, I can't beat this deck, because he's running something that I didn't expect or is unpopular right now, and I'm running the counters to all the other meta stuff, but this one gets through me. It's like, well, that sucks, because then if you had like started with those tech cards for that bad matchup from the beginning, you might not have even made it to that spot, because you needed the other tech cards for what you face along the way. And the game keeps on getting more diverse, so the 12 cards is very restrictive, which is why Kang gets edged out, right? That's how valuable a single spot in your deck is. People thought the effect of Kang is good, but turns out the opportunity cost of a space in your deck is very expensive.
Now, okay, do you know what I think would be an interesting buff for Kane? Because the theory that people had was, if you draw into Kang on 5 or on 6 even, and you just play him, then the turn restarts, and then you draw a new card, so it essentially was free in your deck.
Yes.
Would you be in favor, or at least entertain the idea of maybe Kang having one of those clauses like a Chavez or whatever, where you always draw it on X turn? That way you might be incentivized to play it on turn 5 or on turn 6, you draw it then, to then get your free look of information and then reset the turn, and then get another card to replace him, as opposed to him sitting in your hand from the beginning of the game, and then you're actually down a card technically.
Fascinating. So here, Kang needs something, but in his current form, I don't like him. I just don't really want him to be that competitive, because replaying the turn is just aggravating to me, to then replay the mind games. If he had some kind, like the consistency factor there, if you had a Chavez and a Kang that would like guaranteed to appear on specific turns, he might have to compete with Chavez.
Well, you might run both if it's 5 and 6, and that actually might
if it's
make
5 and 6, you run Birth,
really
and then
you
could just like guarantee your early cards almost every time with the way the deck is or the deck size is currently set up. So that could be dangerous.
Imagine a deck where it's Quicksilver and what's her name, Domino, and then Kang Chavez. So basically, the middle of the deck is, you're pretty much guaranteed to draw them. In the mid game. That's what would be the math on that? Because you have 4 guaranteed slots, 2 start in your hand out of 4, right? After that first turn draw, because you start with 3 and then draw initially. I wonder what the math is on that.
The main thing is like, if you have the Chavez and if you have the Kang, that's guaranteed to appear on 5. If you're running, I think you only need a single thinning effect, meaning Magic or Jubilee, to guarantee seeing every card in your deck every game.
Okay, so then that'd probably be... So it would have to be Kang being a 6/0 if we kept him the same exact effect and added this caveat, and then draw on turn 6, and you can't play him with Chavez. Or essentially, basically, if you play both of them, it's a 50-50 of drawing one or the other on turn 6.
Yeah. I could see the animation now as Chavez opens the star and then Kang punches her and comes in.
Could you imagine if they added stuff like that? That'd be amazing.
The next game is Kang is coming in his little invasion cycle, and Chavez opens a star and punches him and then drops into your hand. You're like, oh my gosh, I got Chavez this time. Okay. It'll be hilarious.
So speaking of, making games last longer, we got Magic as a 3/2, and she is, from a lot of people's perspective, going to be just played in every deck now. I don't think it's going to be that dramatic, but you're definitely going to see a lot more Limbo. And perhaps this makes the stock rise for things like Scarlet Witch, Storm, Rhino even. Okay?
100%. Your location fixers to be able to break the opponent's game plan if they're counting on turn 7 and you're able to cut that short is going to be magnificent. That's kind of... So she's not in her old form, right, where she was playable on 6. Your opponent had no way of stopping that or preempting that aside from a wild shot at Cosmo, right? So now if you set her up early, you're pretty vulnerable to them canceling Limbo at some time or other if they have the capability to do so, especially with how popular Thanos is right now, always having Reality Stone as an option.
That's another thing too, yeah.
Suddenly, Legion, who will then spread your Limbo everywhere, making it uncounterable, is looking a little bit better.
So we talked about why didn't they make him a 4/6 or a 4/5, right? Maybe they knew this was coming, and then that's possibly why.
I also heard Ben Brode thinks, he was unsure in this video clip, but he thinks that the interaction with Storm actually works. That Storm on 4, Legion on 5 locks everything.
Yeah, because they showed it in the trailer.
They showed the beginning of the combo. They did not show what happened on the next turn.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But my argument is why would you show that in the trailer if it didn't work in that way?
Though also they thought that Kitty Pryde wouldn't have bugs when they released her, and they thought that Iron Lad would show both players the card he copied. So the devs just do stuff in their environment that don't work in live. So it could be one of those. Ben Brode was basically saying Legion has been banging around in the dev environment ever since the early testing days. So they've been testing him for years at 5/2. And now they're planning to release him at 5/3 with synergy with Magic. What is happening?
I mean, yeah. So very interesting aspect of Conquest, right? The implication of that, because now you're looking at if once you show that of saying, hey, you can't stop Limbo. If we see the stock of these other cards rise, right, where there's a lot more playable or play to them, being Scarlet Witch and Rhino and things like that, it is an interesting thing of being you need to throw this down early, and then you might be incentivized to hold on to your Magic until 4. So you would go straight 4 or 5.
It depends on if you're trying to key off of Sarah, because the Sarah Magic is the power duo, right?
Yeah.
This was the couple in the beta that was in every deck. Because what Sarah lets you do if you have turn 6 and turn 7 with the energy cheat is obscene. The number of combos, the extra legs that you can have. You could completely hide what your deck does until the final turn and run down Wong, Hazmat, Wong, Mystique, Hazmat, Luke Cage all on turn 7. The opponent was like, oh, that was your deck. Okay. You had no idea what they could do to play against it. So if you're not running Sarah, then the Legion straight into Magic does make a bit of sense. Or just running it as a tech as an alternate option if the opponent is showing they can stop you. Also, the Cosmo will protect your Limbo.
That too. I was thinking you would just go Magic on 3 immediately if you have initiative. Cosmo right behind it, and it'd be you can't stop this.
Exactly.
Now, I don't know how viable or how necessary that is. Also, same thing with the Legion thing, right? We'll have to wait and see how much these other cards come up to stop. Now, there's also the chance of you just running all these kind of cards that shut off Limbo in the deck with Magic to have those surprise turn 6s where you're all right, get fucked. Because, think about it this way. Hear me out. Imagine a deck in which you play Magic and it's Surfer. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're going Brood, and then Jean Grey onto the Brood lane, or vice versa, whatever. Magic, and then like either Rhino Storm followed by Surfer to just shut it down. And like, imagine that in a Conquest game, you can pivot and play the long game as a Surfer player and go, okay, yeah, we're going to keep with this Limbo thing. And that mind game aspect can come into play of like your opponent going, okay, are they going to turn off Limbo, or are they're going to stick with the game? And you have that, that little, trick up your sleeve. I think 100%. That's something to be explored. That sounds super interesting.
Because the opportunity cost of setting up Magic to be able to open up this mind game as a 3-2 is not that high. Like the 5-3 was way more expensive. Spending your turn 5 or 5 energy just in general, usually on turn 5, to only establish 3 power was like abysmal. But spending your turn 3 to set up a 2 power that then gets buffed later by Surfer, you're like, that's kind of what I was going to do anyway.
Yeah.
I might have played a 3-3 instead that had some other effect, but I was probably just going to do that anyway. So now you open up the mind games. The opponent is like, oh, do we get turn 7 or not? Should I dump my hand now or not? If I dump it now and then they leave it, then they hit me with Shang-Chi. If I wait to play around it, they cut it off and then I lose. I need to run Kang.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Now suddenly Kang stock is going up. Like it's very interesting. I'm very intrigued of what's going to happen with this new Magic meta. I saw someone, I don't remember who it was, they tweeted out saying, hey, here's a tip for everybody. Everyone run a Magic deck, but don't run Magic because your opponent's probably going to be doing it for you. And I thought that was kind of funny.
Yes, we're going to see a lot more turn 7s in general. I feel like from what gameplay I've gotten to do thus far, I've not seen Magic absolutely everywhere. I've been running it mostly, but my opponents don't usually have it. I've still been outrunning my opponents, though. I think that Magic is like Magic and Living Tribunal are the huge winners here.
I agree.
Along with Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer is looking great.
Don't sleep on Phoenix Force, but, I guess we'll talk about that on your side of it. So that's going to do it for us here. We have Magic. We have Bounce. Let us know what you think about that portion of the meta, what's going to be happening with this OTA. And, of course, let us know in general what you think of the OTA and what you're excited most for. And with that, let's carry over to Teddy's and talk about what this means for the lesser cards that even Teddy said weeks ago. Living Tribunal might be the worst card in the game.
Yeah.
So maybe
see you guys over on my channel.
Best. Bye-bye.
Can't Stop Snapping is a podcast hosted and produced by Brad Saffer and Teddy Ninja, originally created by Michael Thurman.